I am co-host David Salazar. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, co-founder of OperaWire, and my brother, Francisco. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a really fascinating few weeks. Very excited about the fact that we just launched our first podcast with our guest, Brian Jade, and that has been really fascinating to see the reception that we're getting on that episode. So that was really great. If you haven't heard it, you have to listen to it. It's a really great episode, and Brian goes into real depth about his career, about his health issue that he had a few months ago, about his preparation for Lohengrin. It's a really great episode. I think it was a really
And a lot of digital as well. Yes, it's
yes.
fantastic conversation. We're really grateful for Brian for that opportunity. We're excited because we're going to have a couple of more guests coming up soon. But this week, we're going to go back to our regularly scheduled segments to talk about some of the biggest news stories that have been happening over the last several weeks since we last talked. It's been quite a crazy, there's a lot of things going on. Where do we start?
Well, I think we should start with some good news. I think that that's always really important to start some nice positivity. So this week on January 22nd, the Oscar nominations came out. And generally speaking, this is film. It's not has to do anything with music or opera, but there was a surprise in the original song category in which a documentary, Viva Verdi, was nominated for Best Original Song for a song that was written by Nicholas Pike called Sweet Dreams of Joy. And what was fascinating about it is that soprano Ana Maria Martin is the actual soprano who sings the song. So that's really great to have opera representant in the Oscars.
Yeah, that's amazing news. The documentary has slowly been kind of creeping up on the radar. It's been playing at a lot of major festivals, so it was really wonderful to see what has transpired, the Oscar nomination. And for those of you who don't know, Viva Verdi is a documentary about a home for the elderly that Verdi constructed, and he considered his greatest work. So it's amazing that this story is getting out there, and that also, I'm sure that this Oscar nomination is going to do even more to propel it into the public consciousness. So that's amazing news. Best of luck to the nominees. Congratulations. This is must be an honor. And yeah, I'm sure that we're going to be all looking out for the documentary. We haven't had a chance to see it, but now, of course, I think we definitely want to keep an eye out for when it might release, when it might be streaming. That will be very exciting for the opera.
Yeah, no, and we're hoping that Ana Maria Martinez is able to perform at the Oscars. Generally speaking, they do have the ability to perform the songs. Last year they didn't. They cut it out for a segment of Wicked and for some thing about the 007 that was really a flop in my opinion. But years past they performed all the nominated songs. They did have a controversy in 2015 when Sumi Jo, who had a song that was nominated, was not able to perform 10 years ago for Simple Song Number 3, and that was written by Lang. They weren't able to perform two of the songs. I think Lady Gaga and The Weeknd did perform. So hopefully the Academy does rectify that and understands that diversity isn't only performances by pop artists. Diversity is also in the amount of music that is able to be performed. And Ana Maria Martinez represents the Latin community as well as the operatic community. So hopefully we see her at the Oscars in March. That would be wonderful.
Yes, that would be amazing. So, what's next on the banquet of
On the
muse?
docket. Well, there was another interesting story that the Canadian Opera Company actually wrote about. They actually posted, and that had to do with the series Heated Rivalry. Apparently, one of the stars of that series, Robbie GK, was in the 2024 production of Medea. That was really fascinating. He was one of the supers. But they literally took the time to post this on social media, so I found that to be really interesting. So I guess the Heated Rivalry fans, they should go to the opera too, because maybe they'll see something in the next series that comes from Canada and maybe has performed at the Canadian Opera Company.
I haven't had a chance to see the series. I am meaning to. I'm a big hockey fan, in addition to obviously all my other interests. So I know it's been highly recommended to me. Even the hockey community is starting to talk a lot about this show, and it's getting a lot of people talking about visibility, and obviously the main theme, which is LGBTQ closeted athletes, which is obviously something that needs to be explored. And it's fascinating that even the opera world has that little connection right there.
Oh yeah. That was fascinating to me, and I thought that was, well, I'm just gonna pop that in and just to talk about this show that clearly everybody is fascinated by.
Yeah, and it's also funny that our first two topics are linked to the film industry, which we are also a part of. But
Yep.
it's again opera and the intersection between art forms and world is always really important to remember.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think that it's. I'm just wanted to point out that observation was fascinating to me. That's where we started our conversation today.
Exactly. So, we'll go to the more depressing news, or I don't know if it's depressing, but it's always good to actually like, we've
The main course,
the main
from
course.
appetizers to the
Yeah,
main
well,
course.
opera is drama, so let's just get to the main course of
So
more.
our prelude is done. Now we're going into formally Act One. And I think the big story, there's two big stories. So for the first one, we're gonna stay in New York, where
Yeah,
we are.
we're gonna go
Talk
to
about the Met.
Metropolitan Opera, where
Some
we.
big news stories at the Met this week. Um, the budget's a disaster. Finances are horrible. Budget cuts were necessary. Yeah.
So the Metropolitan Opera announced that they are laying off 22 workers, that they are cutting salaries, including the Metropolitan Opera's general manager, Peter Gelb, and Yannick Nézet again. And they are potentially looking at selling their famed paintings by Chagall.
Wells.
But also important to note that they would sell them, but they would still have to remain at the Metropolitan Opera. So, as much as it sounds bad, it's not as terrible as one would seem. They have also cut Kovanchina for next season. That was actually very sad. I was very excited to see that work. I've never seen it, but I guess we'll have to wait another who knows how many years. And they also announced that they're potentially looking at naming and getting people to put their name on the theater. But that, honestly, I saw that as like, well, they've done it everywhere. David Cog, Geffen Hall. I mean, so it's not anything new. It's nothing that we honestly haven't thought about. And I found it to be like, well, I think we're at that time of the moment of life where these are normal things, so you might as well get with the program.
Yeah, I think it was encouraging that management was willing to take a cut for themselves. So that was probably forced on them because at this point, one of the things that was also in that story was that this famed, infamous Saudi Arabia deal was very much in question right now. I think in the article,
Yeah.
Peter Gelb notes that he wasn't fully sure, that they were waiting on the Saudis to fully commit, that they had to make some changes to their budget. The New York Times reported, but what's curious to me is the New York Times reported that it was $200 million over 8 years. I think originally the report was 100 million
Was
over four.
over 100 million, but they had not reported anything about exact numbers, but they had
Right.
reported originally 100 million or over 100 million. So when I
Right.
saw the number 200 million, I was kind of confused about where did these numbers came from. There hasn't been an exact transparency about what the number is. Clearly it hasn't come through. It's going to take few months to come through. I will say yes, Yannick and Peter Galb were willing to take a pay cut. However, over the past few years, as the budgets have increased, as the house has gone in through a lot of issues, they've always taken a pay raise. And in my opinion, for me, if they would have half the budgets and in half instead of taking a percentage, they would have been able to save probably those 22 workers who now are laid off and have no jobs. So in a way, yes, there's positivity, but I do think that Gelb and Yannick had a chance to look like heroes, which right now they don't, because they're still taking a pay. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve to get paid, they do. But I'm sure that if they took half of their pay and gave it to those 22 workers, they would be fine because they do have probably reserves. They are doing other jobs. Gallup has the executive producer credit on all those HDs and all those streamings and all the other things, and he's made tons of money. His wife's also a conductor, conducting around the world, and Yannick has gigs all over the place. So I don't think that. And again, I'm not saying that they don't deserve to get paid. They do. And they also have, opera is not making them richer, but they are making $1 million salaries. So I don't think it's going to hurt them over time if this year they would have decided to take, half of it and give it into the 22 employees, because those 22 employees right now are now having to look for jobs, which is unfortunate. And especially in this economy and in this, society that we're living. And so right now, that was for me the most negative of this entire release that they did. Um, I
Well, I think it's concerning. I think it's concerning that so much was banking on that Saudi Arabia deal because again, I don't know if this is a full cause and effect situation, but
Right.
from the way that it was reported, it seemed that the reason they had to take this drastic measure was because they obviously didn't want to take from the endowment, which they've been doing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Since they couldn't rely on that Saudi money, they had to make this decision this way. So that tells you that, I mean, let's be real, like money is difficult, the arts are in
Right.
trouble. In this country, they're not getting any support from the government unless the government is doing a hostile takeover, which we'll get to. So you really have to look elsewhere for that support. And it's unfortunate they had to go to Saudi Arabia as their only real viable option because that's really the story behind the story. They don't know what's going on with the Saudis. The Saudis are not fully committed at this point. They already got a lot of pushback from that deal too, by the way. And we talked about it in a previous episode. But now their only other recourse is to cut. And that's the problem, right? Because the bigger issue at large is that inflation is a thing.
Right.
Budgets are going to raise. If your only option is to cut back, there's only so much you can cut back before you start damaging your own product, right? If we're going to look at it in those terms, you need to find a way to make more money, and I understand that the Met needs to stabilize. They probably need to, but right now I think they reported now it's going to be 17 productions this season.
Yeah.
Which means we're probably going to be getting, like, this year we have like 20 Traviatas, 20 Bohems, 15 Butterflies, 14 Carmens, and it's probably going to be a lot like that for the next couple of years. And I mean, hopefully that is good. Hopefully that gets the intended audience.
No, I don't really think it is. To be honest with you, I went to see a production of Madame Butterfly, and it was one of the best performances I've seen all season. And the performance wasn't even sold out. Half these performances are not selling whatsoever. And I think that over time, people are going to get really tired of seeing the same thing over and over. And the thing is, this is not Europe. People are not accustomed to that unless you get them accustomed to. But you can't do this thing of overlapping operas here, one thing here, one thing there. If you want to present Carmen, present those 15 performances of Carmen, one after the other, and then the next month you present Tristan and Isolde, and then the next month you present. The problem is not every opera is going to get that many performances, and that's where they run into issues, and that's where the Met is running into issues. I think right now what the Met needs to do is they need to start advocating for their artists. Enough of the production nonsense. Nobody cares about these productions. People care about the artists that they're seeing. People love Eileen Perez. People love Aigula Machina. Promote them. Puritani was sold not on the basis of that very bad production. It was sold on the basis of the fact that Lisette Oropeza and Lawrence Brownlee were the ones who were promoting this opera. People were there to see them and Christian Van Horn and Arthur Rushinsky. They were not there to see some nonsensical production. Like, people are not there to see this Carmen production by Carrie Cracknell. They're there to see Aigulak Machina. They're there to go see Michael Fabiano. These people are looking to see fans. So if we're going to go and we're going to start promoting productions, maybe they should stop spending so much money on useless productions. And they should start promoting and spending money on putting their artists on The View, on the morning show, on on CBS News. Look, Porgy and Bess, which is a popular work in and of itself because it does, which I'm not a big fan of. But let me tell you, the Met used Denise Graves' retirement and ran that story to there and back, and it was sold out because they knew what they were doing. They were promoting this story. She was on CBS News. She was here. She was there. The New York Times ran a story. The NPR ran a story. We ran a story. It was everywhere. People were like, this is the last time we're going to see Denise Graves. Why? Because Denise Graves has created this name for her. She is this legend. So enough promotion of these stupid productions. Excuse my language. And let's start looking to where exactly people are interested. And people connect to artists, not to productions. People don't know who these artists are anymore because they're not promoting them. They're not giving them the chance to show who they are. So I'm tired of the Met. The COVID excuse, it's gone. This excuse, it's gone. Promote the artist. The artist will sell your productions, not your production. Nobody cares unless it's Ray Fiennes, who's directing right now at the Paris Opera. And Ray Fiennes, because he's an Oscar-winning director. And even then, I would say, is Ray Fiennes really? He's an actor. You also know he's a famous actor, or Christoph Waltz, who also directed a bunch of operas. But also, if you're gonna have them, use them. Put them on the morning show. Put them on The View. Put them places. Don't just take them for granted. Like with Sandra Oh, they made this big thing, Sandra Oh, but where was she? Nowhere. La Fille du Régiment. How well did that sell? It didn't. And that's a fun opera. That's an opera that people want to go and laugh and enjoy. And they made this,
And they had a perfect cast for it, by the way. They had a great cast to sell.
yeah. Why was not? And Sandra Oh has been on all these things. People know her. Maybe not. She's not the most famous, Hollywood actor, but people know her. So go and promote her. What is this?
So I want to jump on two things you said. So first off, I think, playing devil's advocate, I think that 15 performances of Carmen or 15 performances of Traviata does give them the opportunity to put star power in there. So the counter argument would be, well, you want us to focus less on new productions and more on our stars. Well, that's how we do it. Whether the productions are good or not, that's a conversation we're about to have. Then the other thing is, to add to your point about, the stars are what sells. I mean, they're hiring these stars, these singers 5 years out, because that's how the opera industry works. So if you know these artists are coming, you know they're going to be a big part of your future. That's where you got to start pumping that money in, because they're coming. They're going to be here, hopefully, right? Assuming everything goes according to plan, because, of course, the world changes, singers' voices change, life happens. Again, our Brian Jade's interview, I think, is a really great conversation point to understand those kinds of things. But, if you know that you're going to be getting these singers to come and do these operas, then be ready. Aileen Perez is coming to do Madame Butterfly. Be ready. Have her on Latin American shows. She speaks Spanish. She can be that connection to that Latino audience. That you never know. There's so many people, Latin Americans in New York City, and if they find, like, we love our people, we support our people. We just don't know, if we don't know they're there, we're not going to go. So I think, for example, that's just one example that comes to mind of someone that you can really leverage to have your artists be a part of this, especially if you're the entire vitality and lifeblood of your theater is at stake, because this is really what it comes down to. Now I want to shift the conversation, because you talked about productions you don't like, and you talked about no one wants to see this Carmen production. Last night was the last performance. We're recording this on Saturday, January 24th. Last night was the final performance of that Carrie Cracknell production of Carmen. And it was sold. The performance was sold. It was a packed house. I did see a lot of people leave halfway through. I was there, by the way. I was in attendance at this performance. And that's why I wanted to jump on it, because something very controversial happened earlier this week. Carrie Cracknell and some of her production team asked to be removed from the Met Opera programs.
Yeah.
And the reason why was because they got call from the Met's assistant general manager, I believe, who told them that the company of production, excuse me, who told them that the budget was a disaster and they were running out of money, and as such, they needed to make major cuts to the production. Now, among those cuts, for those of you who don't know Carrie Cracknell's production, it's set in contemporary time. There's been a lot of controversy because earlier this year, several protesters came on stage to openly protest the Koch and the oil industry that's putting money into Lincoln Center. We've talked about it. I'm not going to talk about it here, but the production is set in contemporary era. Supposedly the Deep South. Opening scene is in a factory, weapons factory. It's not really on the border. And then the second act is on the road in the middle of, I don't know where. Third act is in the same kind of deserty area. And then the fourth act is at a rodeo with clowns. So what was interesting, let me rephrase that. What was prominent in this production was the second act, where you had this big truck, a couple of SUVs, and then a couple of cars coming on stage, and a motorcycle. And in the original conception of it, which we saw 2 years ago and we absolutely detested, and you can read my review on OperaWire. I reread it last night because I have a point. I have a point to make. In that production, you had the truck, then the cars came on. Escamillo's entourage came on in the cars, And then they eventually shifted the set so that the SUV would come on and the gas station would come in, and then Jose and Carmen scene plays out the rest of the opera. It was kind of like a change of scenery. And because of the budget cuts, from what I can't verify the numbers, but I've heard it's multiple thousands of dollars they were spending, like in the big money they were spending to rent out.
$300,000.
Okay, there you go. $300,000 they saved by getting rid of 2 of the cars. And basically what they did, and I saw it last night, was they basically took Act 2 and they just made it as if it took place in the same location the entire time, which was very different. It is very radically different from the original intention, which was the car's driving down the highway, the truck is driving down the highway, and then eventually it stops when an Escamillo and his people come in, and then eventually we get to a gas station or something. Now, the production team, Carrie Cracknell and company, didn't want their names in the program because it wasn't their original intention. Which, as an artist myself, and as you directors, I can understand that. What I find ironic in all of this is I saw the opening production. I just tested it. You can read my review, as I said. I saw last night's performance, and I know from conversations that a lot of work went into this production by the Revival team, and it shows. And honestly, it was so much better. You could tell how much work went into the production because the story was much clearer. I mean, honestly, there was a point last night where I was sitting there and, I think the aesthetic, it's not for me. I don't like it. If I had to use one word to describe it, I would say it was ugly. And I say that because I just think that visually there wasn't much appealing to it. And I do think that some of the directorial issues from the original run, which the static nature of it, I remember clearly that people were just looking so uncomfortable on stage, and maybe Aigulak Machina was the only one that was doing anything of note in that production, and even then she couldn't save it. And you still see it in Act 3, because Act 3 has the famous turntable with the truck that keeps rotating nonstop, and it's still there, and around it, everyone's just standing around while it rotates because, well, you kind of have to. So that part of the direction is still very much there. But Act 2 was the one that's the big, hotly contested, that's not part of my vision. That one was just way better. That was the best act of the whole performance. For me, it made the entire opera. That's when I plugged in and I said, oh, okay, the performers are actually really amazing. Like, they're really elevating this. And basically what they did was, instead of having the truck driving down the freeway, the truck is already at the gas station, which is not so prominent anymore. We just see it off to the side. And then the SUV is parked on the other side with the front open, so it's like in repair. So the entire scene plays out as if they've already in the encampment here. You don't have the flashing lights that were such an assault on the eyes. And if you were someone that suffered from certain conditions that you can't see flashing lights, they should have, first of all, they always should have had a trigger warning in the program. They don't have to worry about that anymore because the lights flashed a little bit once at the beginning, and then it was done. For the rest of the act, we're just there. Now, why is Carmen and the girls hanging out and dancing in the truck? Doesn't really make sense. Why aren't they out in the gas? Doesn't make sense. And there's still a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. Like, who are the bandits in the context of this world on the southern border? What are they smuggling? What does it say about this world? Still doesn't make any sense. But the Don Jose Carmen dynamic, as performed by Aigulak Machina and Michael Fabiana, and the idea behind is domestic violence, much cleaner. Much cleaner. Christian Van Horn was a perfect Escamillo, incredible. Like, he really felt like he belonged in that costume. He really felt like he was a star. The rest of the cast is incredible. Janae Brugger was also beautifully sung. Micaela. Still, I still think that the blocking in the first act is a little bit awkward. But for example, Aigulak Machina, she really made the most of it in that final act. In that first act, it really stood out. Her Avarena was incredible, very impressive. Incredible singing all around. And the final is,
my thing is, and this is where I will say it, it's like you have these productions, and yes, I know that the first runs don't always go perfectly well. We saw it even with David McVicker's Ana Bolena, and then we saw the revival of it and how much more interesting it was. But I also say, certain productions, I think you have more liberty to be able to do more with it because it's not so set in
Well,
stone.
clearly that's what they did here. Clearly they just said, you know what, this did not work. I'm going to throw it in the trash.
The production, but they had to change the production. So I ask you this: why do you have to change a production that you spent hundreds of millions of dollars on?
Well, that's the purpose, right? I think that's the moral of the story, because they realized that this was not only an unnecessary expense, it was a pointless expense, because clearly the director's vision was so weak that it was better to put it in the hands of a revival director to improve it. So in that case, why spend all that money? You might as well go back to something that A, is more palatable for the audience, probably less expensive, and probably also more palatable for the performers. Because I'm sure that there's major stars out there that look at these productions and say, I don't want to be a part of that. And they won't. So that's why the other part of this story is they basically announced that Richard Eyre's production, and by the way, the New York Times broke the story. I've known this for months. The Associated Press broke this story. I've known this for months from conversations that the Richard Eyre production is coming back. And that's great, because that's an amazing production.
Exactly. And it also updates the story into a specific moment. But Richard Eyre, and this is another Hollywood director as well, very important theatrical theater director as well. Richard Eyre's productions, they veer more a little bit towards the traditional sense, but they also have their modern touches. I mean, I'll never forget the opening of Act Two with the dance. I mean, it's one of the most incredibly staged uh um uh moments in the entire work, and I don't think that anyone has done something as similar or as vibrant as that. And Act Three is also vibrant. There's dance. There's a really great choreography. The last act, it's a bullfight, literally, between Carmen and Don Jose.
This production last night, that final scene, which again, the baseball bat coming out of nowhere still makes no sense, because it's not set up. That the reason why it makes no sense is because it's not set up. That's a directing disaster. But Fabiano and Aigulmat Messina really made that scene work last night. But again, I'm gonna go back.
Probably would be better if they had a production.
I don't know that. I wouldn't go so far as to assume things that I don't know. I'm telling you about my experience last night. What I can say is yes. If you're because at this point, these productions, these quote unquote are auteur-driven productions. The whole point of them is that they have a specific perspective, and that you're going to lean into that storytelling perspective for this opera. If you're not, you might as well go to something a little more traditional that can breathe and can vibrate within the time period, and allow the singers to have more of a perspective on it, them be themselves the interpreters and the auteurs. So yes, the lesson here, just let me get my final point out. The lesson is clearly that you need to, that these productions really, the big problem is that the Met has for so long had these productions that really don't commit to a perspective. We saw that with the Puritani as well, where quite frankly, it is trying not to be in the mushy middle, and the mushy middle just does not work for opera productions. You really need to go for it. You need to go for it with conviction. Go to a European production. Go to Germany and watch what the auteurs are doing over there. They don't care. They're going for broke. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But at least you can admire the commitment. And I feel like directors here are hamstrung by trying to appeal to more traditional audiences, and then for some reason trying to bring in that quote unquote experimental new wave audience. So that's what I wanted to say. And clearly the lesson is that they have to go back because finances don't permit it. So yeah, they have to obviously reassess. And I think this opens the door for what other traditional productions that are really good, by the way, because the Richard Eyre production isn't just whatever. It's an excellent production. What other excellent productions that you threw in the trash can you bring back?
So, two things. I think it's really important to understand when you're creating a new production, that those new productions should be, I mean, obviously they're not always going to be palatable to audiences, but they should also have people that have experience in opera. And bringing in people who have never done an opera like Carrie Cracknell, I'm not sure that that's the Metropolitan Opera is the place to experiment. It's not, especially when you have reduced budgets. And when you have such economical issues like we've been seeing over and over, because Peter Gelb, all he's done over the past 5 years since the pandemic has been talking about the economics, the economics, the economics. So why are you going to bring a director who has no experience in opera to then come and do whatever it is that she did with that Carmen? The other point I will say is with the war horses, Carmen, Tosca, Traviata, be careful with the productions that you're going to bring in. Because we saw with Luc Bondi's 2009 production of Tosca, that didn't even last 10 years. And then they were bringing in a new production by David McVicker that was basically going back to something traditional with a little spin, but it was basically a traditional production. Traviata, which I love that Willy Decker production, right?
I would bring that back. I would bring that back.
Yeah, because whatever they brought was basically Michael Mayer was trying to redo a production of Seferelli, but with a spin of that had the Luc Bondy-isms in it, but couldn't really figure out what he was doing and those horrible Disney costumes. But it was basically going back to something traditional. And now we're in the same boat. Here's Carmen. Let's bring in something. And 2 years later, we're returning to something more traditional. And they're not even bringing in new productions, Richard Ayre's production. So I question, yeah, of course. But once again, we're back at the same exact story. Let's experiment. Why don't we experiment with something a little bit less, a little, I have no problem.
I want to bring up one thing, because you just said something really interesting, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But this is not just a Met-wide thing, because there's festivals and companies in Europe that call in directors years before because they're hot in the moment. And they say, I want this director. And I've heard stories about, for one production of an opera, and I'm not going to say which production it is, a director who called up who basically, apparently it was just a phone call and they were hired. They didn't have a concept. They show up to production.
Yeah.
They don't have their concept fully thought out, and they're literally trying to figure it out while they're directing the production. And I've heard nightmares about how this final act of this production was completely like they were just improvising on the spot. They were taking suggestions from the singer's family, from all the people around them to try and figure out how they bring this production to fruition. And by the way, and again, I'm not going to say which one it was, this production got panned by critics, by everyone. Some people said it was the worst production. This happens everywhere. So this is not just a Met Opera thing. This is an industry-wide disaster.
There is a difference between other opera companies and the repertory companies. The Metropolitan Opera is a repertory company. It's not a production company, right? So if Salzburg decides to do some ridiculous production, well, that's a festival. They're allowed to experiment. That's what they're there for. A repertory company needs to be a little bit safer because they're presenting 20 operas a year. A production company is representing 5, and we know that that's what they're going to do. They're going to experiment. And, we could say about Munich or Vienna or blah, blah, but the Met, their audience is still traditional. They still have a traditional audience. And they're not actually seeking out younger audiences if we actually think about it. Look at what they have a younger audience right now. They are getting younger audiences, but it's still far and far between. I honestly think, in my opinion, if you're going to do a war horse, be very careful with the director that you bring in, you put in. I also say, be very careful with the productions that you're going to spend money on as well. Look, this Puritani production, I didn't like it. Some people liked it, but I'll say it. Why are you bringing in a new production of an opera that you're going to present in 10 years? Because that's how it's been with Puritani. You don't present that because you need a diva to sing it. Unless they already have a production lined up 2 years from now, don't present it. And this is what I say. Stop wasting money on new productions if you don't already have them lined up to be revived. I get it. We need to expand the repertoire. We need to figure it out. So then waste the money on the new productions of the new operas. That's fine because they're new operas and we need opera to be alive. Don't spend it on new productions that won't come back till in 10 years, or if they're not co-productions. With Janáček Strinufa, it's probably a cost saver because it's already a co-production with Chicago and Royal Opera House, which is coming next season. But Puritani wasn't announced as a co-production. We're not going to see it in 10 years. Don't spend that money. Spend it somewhere else, especially when you have financial issues. We know that. And Cavalier and Clay needed to come because it's an opera that they commissioned and it's a new opera. Or even Grounded, which, I wasn't a big fan of. But those were co-productions. And you need to, instead of spend money on productions that won't come back or productions that have to come back and people don't like them, be wise about those decisions. I mean, again, I'm talking from an outsider, but I keep hearing there's no money, and then I keep seeing these new productions of works that I know are not coming back. I hope that Puritani comes back. I didn't like the production, but we already have this.
But we know, but to your point, yeah, it's a Met exclusive production of an opera that they hadn't done for 10 years. And before that, they'd done it a few times because they had the right singers to do it. But those singers were doing the traditional production. So it's an opera that if they want to do it, I'm sure that the singers would just do it in the other production. They wouldn't have needed a new production that, quite frankly, kind of masqueraded as traditional anyways, just with, the more budget-friendly looks, of a modern production without adding anything really substantial to the storytelling. Again, it was that mushy middle of where I'm like sitting there watching that production and saying, who is this for? Because even Lisette Oropeza was a queen. She was incredible at night. But man, that character introduction that she gets where she's throwing things around like a child, I mean, it was not very flattering for your heroine. It didn't really paint an interesting portrait of her. It made her seem pouty. It was not a very well conceived or directed approach on any fronts. If I'm going to go into the details of where I issue with the production, I thought that the characterizations were off. I thought that the use of the set was awful. The mad scene was one of the most egregiously directed things I've ever seen. I mean, you having the two of your main characters just sitting in the wings watching as she's about to stab herself with a mace. The direction with the props was, I mean, it was not a good production. And what I get to is, and again, looking back at my Carmen review, one of the things I mentioned was that it seems like the Met doesn't have enough rehearsal time or doesn't give enough rehearsal time for its directors to fully commit to their vision or fully get to their vision. And again, theater is a work in progress always.
Right.
I go back to that experience with Tosca several years ago, the first time they did the David McVicker production, where the first two performances were disastrous, and by the end of the run, it was so clear that the vision had come to fruition. So it's not like you can't give it a chance. And again, with this Carmen, with a different directing team, again, the irony of all of this is that the original director couldn't figure out what to do, but then the revival directors clearly worked on it. And I don't know how the fall cast was. Our own review written by Jen Pyron suggests that it wasn't that great, whereas my experience last night was very positive. So I don't know if it was also, maybe it was just, Aigula Peshina has been singing Carmen worldwide to tremendous acclaim. I saw her when she first did it at ROH in a different version of Carmen, and she's always been an incredible singer. And now she's, now she's a superstar. And Michael Fabiano is an incredible singer who the last few times I've seen him, I've just seen his singing develop, and there was just so much color and so much intensity in what he brought to San Jose. So maybe that's also a product of singers coming in and saying, we're going to find out a way to make this work. Because again, you also often hear this from people at the Met, is that when they do a revival, it's like the revival directing team are no more than traffic directors. They're just directing traffic. It's not like they're allowed to impose their vision. How much that, from what I understand, there was a lot of work from the team that went into doing more than just directing traffic, and it showed. And that's also, again, probably in part because the singers came in and said, we're going to make this work, and they did.
Look, again, I think revivals are great. I think, and obviously with Carmen, they needed to revive that because Carmen's a warhorse. But once again, make sure that if you're going to bring something, be safe. You may, not everyone is going to like something, but not everything is going to be so derided as this Carmen production was. People did not like this, or that Lucia production, which people did not like. And where has it been? It's not here. There's no singers for it. Why would you bring a new production of something like Lucia when you don't have anything lined up? And then you have it nowhere. And, when you have a perfectly fine traditional modernistic production that tells the story perfectly and more people are more interested in it. Was like the Traviata. Look, I love that Billy Decker production, but I knew the minute that they brought it in, not everyone can do that production. That production is very specific, and not everyone is going to.
Which is also why it works. Which is
Right,
also why it works.
right. But
Because it
why
doesn't compromise. It doesn't compromise.
Right, but not everyone first will fit into that dress, and number two will be able to do the production, because not every physical ability, but not everyone has the same can run around a stage for 2.5 hours and sing this really difficult Verdi music. I personally think it's a very specific production that only works with specific singers, and the minute that you specify it, the minute that you're not able to bring it back, and then you have to bring the same singers over and again, and the same singers are not going to want to do that same production over and over.
No, I understand. And I understand why that production, which I love, and I know it's not a popular opinion, is not still at the Met, and why it's probably not something. I mean, in my fever dream, if you had to choose, and maybe this will be an episode we can do at some point, or maybe this is an article. If I had to pick some productions at the Met that I would love for them to revert back to, that would be one of them. I know that's not going to happen because the Michael Mayer's production for all the stuff that we say about it is probably something that's palatable for most mainstream audiences, and understandably that's where they're going to go and they're going to stick with it. So fine, whatever, that's not going to happen for Traviata. But I do think
this is Madrid.
But those productions that's precisely what I say. Either you're going to fully commit to a vision, like that Willie Decker production of Carmen, of Traviata, excuse me, which I think is one of the best things the Met has brought in the Peter Gelb era, or you just don't go crazy, because most of the time you're getting these half compromises that no one likes, that are not going to sell, because the word gets out. A lot of this is word of mouth. If it's not a heavy hitter and you're bringing in productions of operas that get performed once in a while with these bel canto pieces, and then look at half of the bel canto repertory they built up in new productions throughout the 2010s. I mean, we haven't seen any of that in ages, and who knows if they're gonna, because it seems like the musical direction has shifted away from that. Which, fine, whatever. Maybe having Daniele Rustioni now changes that a little bit, but it's bel canto is surely not a Yannick Nézet-Séguin priority. Fine,
He doesn't expect it.
But what's the point of all that money that they spent building up that repertory? And again, it's not like the Met shouldn't be a museum either, where you're just putting on the same things over and over again. But it clearly now, with the continuous cuts from 18, it was 25, there was 18, now it's 17. It was 6 new productions of new operas. Now it was 4 this past season. Now who knows how much more that's going to go down, like, as compromises continue to be made. But you really got to start asking yourself, at what point do you stop making? I mean, you have to be really smart about where you invest the money and which operas you're gonna. Again, it's like what you said. If you're gonna bring La Sonambula once every 10 years, or if you're gonna bring I Puritani once every 10 years, don't invest in a new production, because the reason why you're doing that opera to begin with is not the production. It's the singers.
Right.
You're doing it because Lisette Oropeza wants to sing that role, and because she's a superstar and she's worldwide and she's not singing as much as she should be at your company. Then you're bringing her in, and sure, I understand you want to showcase her in a new production, but people aren't going to see the new production. They're going to see her.
Yeah.
And you don't need to waste your money like that. And I think that's where leadership doesn't really. It's like you said, their focus is on the wrong thing. It's like, we have to sell to an audience because we got a new production going on. No, you're gonna sell to an audience because they want to they want to see the artist. And I'm sure there's a counter argument to that too. But I do think that, in essence, if we're talking strictly about the Mets' financial issues, and I know we've been going on this topic for a while, so maybe we want to cut it short at some point, but think about the singers. People are not going to be going to see Puritani because they think that you're going to, and again, especially the way that the Met has done it creatively over the years, I don't have any faith that they will find directors that are really going to commit to a vision that challenges the audience. I think that they're in the mushy. It's always in the mushy middle, and it's always stuck there. And very few times have I seen anyone really push that boundary. The Traviata's production is maybe one of the only examples that comes to mind in terms of the traditional, operas from the Romantic era up to the 20th century stuff and the 21st century stuff. Different. It's different. But with the more traditional canon, I have rarely seen anyone at the Met really go that far.
And I just want Before we close this segment, I had talked about Madame Butterfly and Aileen Perez. She did go on Spectrum News and she did an interview in Spanish, but I don't think that that's quite enough because Spectrum does not have the same audience as Univision or Telemundo. Those audiences are much bigger, and I do think Eileen has done so much to promote it, but she also needs the help of the Met. And the other thing, Sonambula was a co-production and it had been performed prior to the Met in Europe. So for me, like that was perfectly normal that they brought Sonambula. For me, Puritani just seemed like if it wasn't a co-production, it's a waste because it's an opera that we haven't seen since 2017, and who knows who's the next performer unless it's Nadine Sierra doing it or some other big singer. The Met won't bring, I don't know, someone that's not known to the Met, like, I don't know, Sarah Blanche or Adela Zaharia. These are not, stars in what they think is a star, even though they're great singers and could perform this repertoire. There are people that could perform this repertoire, but they need their quote unquote stars. But you really don't create stars unless you're actually developing these artists and making a debut here, making a debut there, and not bringing them back or not developing their careers at the Met will never allow you to actually quote unquote make these stars or allow you to be able to communicate with the artist. So I do think that there are ways, but I don't think that they've figured out how to raise artists and create and be able to create careers at the Met where people get to know the artists. But we should move on to the next topic, which is a new production at the Met, which is actually Tristan and Isolde, which is our opera of the episode. And I think that it's an opera that I talked about on our Patreon.
Your favorite.
One of my favorites. It's one of my favorite operas, and it's an opera that we actually have seen numerous times. Will actually be a new production by Yuval Sharon, which is quite interesting because the last production that the Met did, they only showed once. The other time was canceled because of the pandemic, and hilariously enough, they never brought it back. This is what I'm saying about operas that are not coming back, and then we spend money on new productions. Granted, this is a special occasion. This is Lisa Davidson's second Isolde. She made her debut just recently at the Gran Teatro Liceo, and this will be her second Isolde. I think this is everybody's been expecting this since Lisa Davidson came on the scene.
Yeah, and also Michael Spires is singing Tristan, which makes it much more interesting. He's a very unique singer, and I'm actually very excited to see how that pairing plays out. And I think that Davidson has an amazing voice. Mm-hmm. I have we have our thoughts about her, and I'm not going to do that, but she's an incredible artist. She has an amazingly massive voice perfect for the Met. And I'm really excited to see what she does with this role. I haven't heard her since I think it was Fidelio was the last time it was Fidelio, hear her. So, Isolde is one of the most incredible roles ever. The opera is absolute perfection. And we've had some interesting stories in our history with this opera. You saw it for the first time in 2006, 2007, I want to say.
I think it was 8, but I don't remember the exact.
Let's just call it the Ben Heppner, Deborah Voigt fairy tale.
Yes, this Ben Heppner. Everyone was excited to see Ben Heppner and Deborah Voigt reunite to sing their first Tristan and Isoldes at the Met. And that became the Odyssey of the Tristan and the Isolde. And I remember going to see it. I was really excited. It was my first Tristan and Isolde, and I was there. And the first
second performance, right? Second performance?
I think it was
because Ben Heppner canceled the first one, right?
Yeah, he canceled the first one, and then he canceled the second one. That was Gary Lehman's debut.
Right, because there was 2 different Tristans for the first 2 performances. The first, I don't remember who the first one was, and then Gary Lehman.
It was Gary Lehman. He was the first 2 because Gary Lehman then fell, and during the third act, I believe, and he was replaced by Robert Dean Smith, who was on the HD. Right. And then Deborah Voigt canceled a performance in the 5th performance, and Ben Heppner was on that one. Janice Baird sang that one. And then finally, the last performance,
the 6th one,
the sixth one, they were finally able to perform together, which I guess it was a happy ending to a very chaotic.
But you got to see second performance.
I got to see one. Yes,
like what happened on that one?
And Deborah Voigt had sang amazing first act, incredible. He was okay. He was fine, right? I was just happy to be able to see Deborah Voigt, and all of a sudden, second act is happening. We're about to get to we're starting the duet, and all of a sudden Deborah Voigt runs out, and we're like, what just happened? It was the most surreal experience I'd ever heard in my entire seen in my entire operatic career to that moment. I've seen other things now, and we were just sitting there for like 15 minutes, and we're like, what's going on? Finally, someone came out and said that Deborah Voigt was ill, and that Janice Baird was going to make her Met debut in the middle of this music. James Levine was conducting, and it was a really heartbreaking experience because I was really excited to see Deborah Voigt sing Isolde. I really loved Deborah Voigt when she was performing, and she was incredible. She was incredible. So, unfortunately, I didn't get to see her full Isolde, so I only got to see the first act and a half. The first act and a half of the second act. Janice Baird and Gary Lehman, they were fine, but it was really not.
I mean, it's also really. I mean, imagining Janice Baird's situation. It's a really crummy to like just come into the middle of one of the most difficult operas ever, and to have to like make your debut under those circumstances. Because that I feel for the artist there, because a lot of the times when they got to jump in the middle of something like that, especially because of the tension that must have been building for those 15 minutes that everyone was waiting for to understand what had happened. I mean, for her, and like, it's a hard opera, you're jumping into the middle of a love duet, it's an expansive half an hour scene that's really difficult. I feel for the artist there. I can't really, of course.
I think my perspective changes now. My perspective changes from when I saw it. I think right there I was a little bit like, I don't want to say unjust. I was disappointed. I think that that's why I was mostly disappointed, because I was there to see one person. I ended up seeing a completely different cast, and that happens. It's opera. And I will say, Maddie Solomon, he was amazing as King Mark. I remember his performance. He was just riveting. He stole the show that night. It was just such amazing singing. I'll never forget his aria in that second act. And I think that for me that's what made the night. And of course, James Levine's conducting of Tristan. I mean, he was a master of Wagner operas. So I mean, it was an interesting first Tristan, and you had another really interesting Tristan with Daniel.
So mine was interesting because I don't remember who was originally scheduled. It was Daniel
Katrina de Lyman.
Right, Katrina de Lyman, and we're on our way to go see this production, and then I think you told us that there was a cast change, and yeah, I mean, we would show up, and we get the announcement that, wow, I just blanked. I'm sorry.
Waltraud Meyer.
Sorry, wow, how do I forget her name? Wow, Waltraud Meyer is going to be singing Isolde that night. Daniel Barenboim, and of course they have that famous recording, that production from where is that from? Is that from Salzburg?
Bayreuth.
It's from Bayreuth. That Bayreuth.
I had actually named it on it was Siegfried for Jerusalem.
It's for Siegfried. Yes, that recording is one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen. Yes, I'm sorry, excuse me, my brain just. Anyways, Waltraud Meyer is singing at the Met. She was completely unexpected. And I feel even horrible that I forgot her name, but the experience, that was one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen of anything. It was just spellbinding from beginning to end. That was the first time I'd ever seen the opera. And I mean, right now, it just coming to my mind is I'm picturing her during the Liederstod at the end. And Daniel Barenboim, also an incredible conductor. His Wagner is very expansive. It was a lengthy evening, but I remember it flying by because of how incredible the performance was, especially her. And then the only other time I think after that we saw it was the new production with Nina Stemme
Hmm.
and Stuart Skelton, which I don't necessarily love that production, but
Nope.
like you said, it was a one and done kind of deal. And
Well, that's where I honestly think it's like you're gonna replace the Dieter Dorn production, which by the way has these really interesting lighting effects, particularly in the second act. I thought it was, and
well, I think the promotional material for that production was better than the production itself.
no, oh yeah. But that no, we're talking about Dieter Dorn was the production, the old
Oh,
production.
sorry. Wow.
Strelinsky was the new production.
The trillion. Yeah.
No, you're fine. I mean, it happens. There's just so many names happening, but no, the Trelinsky production was nothing special to me. I remember.
So for that one, sorry, for that Trelinsky, it was the promotional material was so incredibly beautiful with the Starry Night.
Yeah.
And especially when you consider the philosophical implications of in the Schopenhauer and the day and night, in that opera, and how you would think that the production was really going to play into those concepts, and it kind of does. But it does it in such a way that it feels so vacuous half the time. Like the production was not, it felt, I don't know, it felt so big and so empty.
Yeah.
Just the set, so massive. And it just didn't lean into the intimacy of what this opera is. Whereas the Dieter Dorn production with the symbolism of the sun and how it plays with light. And then how even I remember the Brian Large recording on the HD. It's one of the most incredible experimental videos of opera.
That's right.
We can have a conversation about HDs, and that's a whole other thing that I think that the Met needs to address in terms of their finances, especially because that's Peter Delp's baby. That's one of the best recordings of any HD I've seen, because Brian Large, who is one of the greatest directors of opera, video opera, he really went there with the experimentation and playing around with the overlaps and the split screens and all of these things to really take advantage of what this production and what this opera, quite frankly, has to offer an audience. For me, yes, that production was absolutely beautiful in how it used symbolism in a minimalist sense to entrance you in this, in this world of this opera. So I'm very excited to see what Yuval Sharon does. I've started to read his book, A New Philosophy on Opera.
It's a very interesting book,
and I love to discuss it when I'm finished with it with you, in anticipation of this production, because I think he's a really interesting director. I've heard a lot of things about his work. He isn't without his controversies. He isn't without people questioning, but I have faith that perhaps he's one of those directors that is willing to fully commit to his vision and really challenge the audience. So, and if that's the case, which I hope it is, this looks to be an exciting Tristan and Isolde, which also, by the way, has incredible promotional materials with Lisa Davidson in front of the mirrors. So, hopefully it is. We'll probably find out next month. But in the meantime, we're going to leave it here. We have other stories to pick up, but I think we can wait and see how things unfold for our next episode. We really appreciate you guys for listening. We know that this was a very lengthy conversation. I think it went longer than we thought it would, but we're really happy that we were able to share what we shared with you today.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. And like always, subscribe to our YouTube page, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. And you can listen to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and on YouTube. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you at the opera.